I love the way the universe works. As I was beginning to dig into the study of tarot, my husband Jeff came across a brand new deck of cards and methodology that can be applied to us as individuals, as well as brands and businesses. This new practice is called AEONology, and it's been created by Jeff's former colleague, William Charnock, and designer Graham Wood. When I took a look at the stunning cards and the thinking behind them, I knew we had to talk to William.
His life journey, as well as his additional studies in philosophy, psychology, history, alchemy, magic, and ancient texts are fascinating and have led to the creation of the Knockwood cards. Williams had a long history of transforming tremendous global brands. He found that after 30 years of working within many Fortune 500 companies, he had many lists of values, behaviors, personalities, and archetypes that he'd collected over the years. He began to see patterns, and we'll have him tell the rest of the story.
So William, tell us about your background.
Well, my background is sort of interesting. I grew up and came through a traditional sort of advertising and marketing background. What my focus has always been has been sort of behavior change, really, of how can we use communications to affect behavior. And so that's actually been a theme that's sort of gone through everything. And I was using mass media as a really good way to sort of tell stories and try and get people to behave in a different way. From that space, sort of jumped really early on into the digital world when everyone said, don't leave the advertising world. Digital is small, it's only going to be a subset. And I was like, no, this software is one of the most powerful tools I've ever seen for changing human behavior. So I joined a company called RGA. I was their first global chief strategy officer. That was my background, very much in that space. It's not connected with this at all.
In addition to that professional background, can you talk about, I know what's come up when you've talked to Karen and I, is that you actually are an atheist.
Yeah.
Which I think is really, it's important in talking about what we're discussing.
And how do you define atheist too?
Yes.
I'd be fascinated to know that.
I was brought up in a household that was, my mother was the religious one. She was an agnostic, and my father was a really strong atheist. I had always grown up with a sort of sense that I didn't believe in anything. And it was mainly the sort of traditional, sort of formal religious things. But again, a very pragmatic, very functional view of life and the universe. I don't know if I'm still an atheist.
I don't think you are.
I don't either. I mean, I would think with this work, it's probably opened up something.
Well, this work has really opened up my appreciation. And again, this is where I tap dance around the edges on this, because while I consider myself an atheist, what I do believe is that there's a lot of stuff in the world that we just don't understand and we don't know about. And I'm really comfortable with that. And I'm really comfortable that I don't have to know everything. Now, do I make up beliefs and create beliefs to help me process some of those things? And these cards have actually helped me think about all of the things that I really don't know about or don't fully understand. And I do end up creating beliefs around those things. But again, I'm not sure what I would put myself in the formal religion space, but I am really comfortable with forces and energies that I don't comprehend and I don't understand.
And how do you define what an atheist is?
My definition is more in the sort of not following a particular dogma of faith. So I tend to believe that there are things in the world that I don't fully understand. I don't follow a formalized dogma around that. I forgot who it was. Someone told me a definition of atheism, which I really liked, which was, okay, even if you believe in something, there's something you believe, but that's not the same as what everybody else believes. And this person said, well, you know what? I'm you plus one. It's like all those things that you don't believe, I equally don't believe. And I just happen to not believe the one other thing that you do believe. It's not an active belief, it's just an absence of a formalized belief.
I had a different interpretation, so I'm so glad you defined it.
And just versus like an agnostic, I think that may come up, people questioning what's agnostic versus atheism.
Agnostic, I mean, again, a lot of my work has been looking at ancient Greek language, and gnosis, which is knowing, so agnostic is not knowing. I think atheist is knowing, but knowing that there is an absence, not knowing that there is a presence. So I have a sense that I know there is an absence of some formal godlike figure. I can still reconcile that alongside, I actually know there are a lot of forces and energies and things that I don't understand. And that can be anything from quantum physics, which I find absolutely impossible to understand, up to there are things that happen that I have no way of knowing why they've happened that way. And I can ascribe certain magical energies or magical forces or certain beliefs that I have as to why those may have happened. Those get really close to religion and spirituality, but they're not actually a sort of formalized basis. They also tend to be quite fluid. So that sort of way of thinking has allowed me to sort of pick some of the spiritual tools that I find helpful and drop some of the others. So I have a little bit of a utility of belief, and I don't have to know why. I don't have to have a rationalization for it, but I can see that there's a thing here that I don't know why, but it seems to happen that way. That's why I hesitate to say atheist, because I do believe in some of these unknown things that we're trying to get our heads around why they happen, and we perhaps create our own belief for them. And also I found myself very much a Renaissance man, picking up lots of interesting beliefs from all over the place and stitching them together in my own way. And one of the interesting things, if I connect that back to my advertising world, in the advertising world, we were so obsessed by rationality and reason. We were so determined to prove that advertising works and had an effect that we actually got so much into the logic and the reason behind advertising that we ignored all the intangibles and these unknown things, which sort of seems really weird for an industry that's all around creativity. But what I found myself in the advertising world is going, why do we have to keep so focused on reason and logic? Are there other modes of operation that we can tap into? I found myself using that same atheism, agnosticism in the advertising world, and starting to talk to people about the non-rational, the non-logical ways in which marketing and advertising works. And when you think about a brand, it's actually the intangibles of the brand that are actually the most powerful, not the tangibles. The tangibles are really boring. It's all the stuff that we can create. And I call that magic. I call that magic of what's this intangible? What's this thing we don't really know why, but we create a relationship with people. We create a sense of mystery as to imbuing a product with some sort of attribute or quality that we can't quite put our finger on. And if that's not magic, I sort of don't know what is.
I love that you talk that way, because coming out of the corporate advertising world myself, I just feel that everything is always so data driven, right? It's like, what are the numbers telling us? What's the demographic?
As you were saying that, I was just thinking of a quote that I've used quite often, which is Aleister Crowley. He defined magic as a set of beliefs that believers have, that they can have an effect, that they can affect change. An effect a change that non-believers think would be impossible. And so in some ways, those who believe in magic can see changes happen that non-believers would think, oh, you could never do that. And so that's how I've been defining magic. It's believing that something can happen that the rest of the world thinks is impossible. And that definition applies on so many levels. It can apply to your own self. It can apply, in my world, in branding and marketing. But I think it can apply in bigger cultural shifts. So most people will say that's totally impossible, but if you believe it can change, you can actually make it happen. So there's a whole magic there.
Oh, it's so true. I mean, it actually just makes me think about all of my time working with Oprah. She would always talk about where she came from, right? She was a little girl. Her grandmother they'd be churning butter, and her grandmother would say, you have to learn how to churn this butter. And she's like, no, I don't, because I'm not going to be doing this. And she was a little girl, and that's what she believed.
Were you the guy in the office that people looked at to inspire, or did they bring you in the room for the strategy? How did you navigate that?
I've always played in the edges. I've never played in the center. Now, it does mean sometimes I've actually ended up in corporate environments where I am the crazy mad guy who's made someone use a tarot deck to get to a brand strategy. But I'm sort of amazed how much people sort of just accept it. It's amazing how desperate people get for new ideas, and they just sort of embrace it. And sometimes it leads to wonderful things.
How did that evolve? You were studying human behavior, applying that to the creative process. When did you start using the term magic or intuition or seeing the patterns? How did that evolve over time within your career?
Well, I think I spent 20 years. It was later in my career, definitely, that I had the confidence. And the funny thing is, we often think that trends and fashions and creativity is an exercise in looking outward. And for a long time, I did that. And really what I started doing was looking at the problem that the client I had in front of me was talking about. I was looking at that problem from that other perspective, from, oh, let's do what they did. Let's do something like the award-winning piece. Let's do something like that. And you know what, that can be really successful. But at a certain point, I realized that creativity was an inner focused initiative, not a outwardly focused. And I started thinking, well, you know what, I have points of view on what good work is. And I just started getting more confidence in my own beliefs and my own belief of what was possible. And I think it was that leap. It was the leap from looking outward to looking inward that then made me realize that actually creativity is knowing yourself, knowing your point of view. That was my journey, is that really later on, I was like, you know what, I have a point of view here. And it's like that old, the Delphic oracle on the door of the temple to Delphi for the oracle. It says, know thyself. And I think that's true. It's really, you can only make amazing creative leaps by knowing yourself and knowing your own imagination, having a confidence in your ideas.
You're hitting on something like such a valuable perspective.
But we never teach that in creativity. We never teach that to our interns, to the young people. We tell them to follow and replicate other people. And I do a lot of work with diversity and bringing women into the advertising industry. What we want is their voice. We want their ideas. And so unless we teach them importance of their own ideas, unless we teach them that they know what good is, and their good will be different to the good of the 40-year-old white guy who runs the department. That's what we've got to teach people. I had to say how this connected back to my atheism or my attitude to spirituality. I think it's when you have those beliefs and you are confident in those beliefs, that's where you start to tap into all sorts of things that, again, you don't fully understand. You don't know whether it's subconscious or conscious, but it's just a gut feel that you have. There's an idea that comes out of nowhere. And who knows, it's when you're sleeping, it's in your shower. And to be able to pick that idea up and run with it is actually hard for a lot of people. What I teach in creativity is that that's the stuff that is magical. And so that's why I do put that connection between advertising, marketing, self-knowledge, and magic all together in the same bucket.
I think what you just said is going to inspire a lot of people to pay closer attention to those sparks and to those ideas and to realize that's creativity in process. Then when did you start to see the patterns in the work that you were doing? And is that what was an inspiration for you to dive deeper into ancient texts and psychology and brain chemistry?
Yeah, and to be totally honest, the path that I went on started from a very, very conventional place. The path started really in my work, and I, like everybody else in the industry, used Carl Jung's 12 archetypes. These archetypes are wonderful. They're really good framework for thinking about stories and narratives. It's a typology in many ways. The work I was doing originally was all storytelling, so that worked perfectly. But as my work went into that behavioral space, where we were actually talking less about imagery and perception and much more about how should you behave as an organization, that's when I found those 12 archetypes were really a little limited. So I basically set out to say, right, let's create a different set of archetypes. Let's create some archetypes that are based around behaviors rather than stories. I'm not the first person to think about human behavior. I decided that I wouldn't invent something new. I'd go back in history and look at every single categorization of human behavior I could find. I went Hippocrates to the humors. I went all the way back to Aristotle and some of his different types of human beings. I went into alchemy and astrology, where you're looking at air, fire, water, which are both, they're signs of matter, but they're also signs of behaviors. So there were earth signs and there were fire signs, and they all had behavioral characteristics. All the way through Freud, Jung, behavioral psychology, Myers-Briggs, Enneagrams, and then ending up with sort of modern behavioral science and brain psychology. So I did that full exploration and basically found that there were some patterns in all of those things that they found. And I wasn't looking for the commonalities, I was looking for where they differentiated themselves. And I came to the idea that there were 6 core motivations of human behavior. It was from that study and that work that I did that I started creating a set of 36 archetypes. So it's 6 by 6 was 36. So there was a method by which I created these archetypes, gave them names. But then I made the leap of saying, right, I'm going to create a deck of cards because I'd really like to sort these cards and use them as prompts to clients to think about how they want to behave. The minute you start to create a deck of cards, that's when people start asking you to do a reading. That's when people start asking you to, can you use these on me? And so that's what I found myself starting to use the cards in sort of interesting ways, both with clients and with individuals.
Do you remember that first time and what that was like and what was going through your mind?
Well, it started very simply in that I would do card sorting exercises and just ask them, pick the ones that are like you, pick the ones that aren't. But later on, after I'd done that a few times, I actually started using them more like a tarot, where the randomness of the card actually helped trigger and create some sort of response in them. And that was when I started thinking this is sort of a powerful tool for sort of unlocking things that they weren't thinking about. The other thing I noticed was that when I took these cards out to parties or events or places where I was with other people, there is a real power in having this deck of cards in your hand and doing a reading with people. And so I found myself doing readings at parties or events, and some of the most intimidating people I could ever possibly imagine ended up in deep conversation with crowds of people around just watching and listening because I had a $10 deck of cards in my hand. And it was a deck of cards not like anything they'd seen before. And they were listening to me in a way that if I hadn't had that deck of cards, they probably wouldn't have. And so that's when I realized there's something quite powerful about the use of cards because it has a cultural resonance. When the card has a particular meaning and the position has a particular meaning, you don't actually have to do much, but the person makes a connection for them. And if they tell you what that connection is, it actually often unlocks a load of things that they might not have unlocked without the prompt of the card in that position. And that was the point at when I decided, okay, I can't use these cards that I created for work for individuals anymore. And that's when I created the second deck, which were actually designed specifically for more individual readings.
Well, let's talk about in developing those cards, what you used for the second deck. And I'd love for you to also talk about the predestined meeting with Elaine Pagel.
So having developed that first deck of cards, and I'd been using them with individuals, what I realized was that language was wrong. It wasn't resonating with individuals in the same way as it resonated with brands and businesses. And so I started off really just trying to find a new language for helping people think about themselves and the different facets of themselves. And I looked around and I couldn't find anything that I liked. There was an awful lot of it that had been sort of either co-opted or it felt superficial. And so it was that search for language that I stumbled across this book, an old text called Pistis Sophia, which is the faith of Sophia, which is wisdom. And so in the Pistis Sophia, there's this description of the origin of the universe. It's a cosmology. And there's these waves of generations of these things called AEONS that are sort of born at the beginning of time. And then as they evolve, they get closer and closer to sort of material. So they start in a very divine place and they get closer and closer to the material world. And what I found in there was a language that I thought was very distinct, very different. And that's when I came across this idea of aeonology, which apparently in the first, second, third century was a big way of thinking about yourself, thinking about the world. And what I found was that there was a really big overlap between some of the things that I'd identified in the first deck of cards. And actually the symmetry was almost uncanny. The structure of 6 and then the pairings of those 6 to create 36 was almost the exact structure of this thing, aeonology, which dated back till the 1st and 2nd century. The idea in aeonology is that at the beginning of the universe, there was this thing, the monad. The lone being, mono, is like being on your own. This monad was this supreme divine being, and it turns out he's like God's grandfather. He existed in nothingness, in total nothingness, but the word for nothingness was seek, which was female, and monad, he was called Bythos, he was male. And so these two created from nothingness, he had a thought. And so in having a thought, he created nous, which is mind, and that was everything that he could think as a supreme being. And at the same time as he created that, then he created everything else that was not in his mind was also created, and that was truth. So it was the inner and outer again. It was like everything that was inner is mind, and everything that was outer was truth. And so there's this story of how from them there's this generations of 36 aeons that are born into the world, which are all the things that exist within the world. I was in the middle of reading these first and second century texts, and I was getting very deep into these texts that were discovered in Egypt, in the desert. They were discovered in the 40s, but they didn't really get written up until the 70s. And these are the texts that have the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Thomas, and a whole load of other texts that were amazing. So I was reading these texts and going back to the original Greek, and I was at a party, and I was chatting with this woman for most of the evening. And then towards the end of the evening, she said, "Oh, well, what's your name?" And I said, "William." And I said, "What's yours?" And I said, "What do you do?" She said she was a sort of historian of theology. And I said, "Oh, I'm just reading the Pistis Sophia and this wonderful text called Thunder the Perfect Mind, which is a sort of second century Gnostic text." And she said, "Really? Why are you reading those? What is that?" And I said, "Well, I'm doing this project and I'm working on these things." And what I hadn't realized, having talked to her for the whole evening, was that this was Elaine Pagel, who was actually the person who first translated and really first looked into all of these texts that were discovered. And so from that, you can imagine my mind at that moment. I'm like, this is so serendipitous. In the middle of these reading these texts, I'm literally talking to the person who really dived in and understood these non-conventional gospels. And so she wrote a book called The Gnostic Gospels that is really one of the best theses on all of these texts. And so I was really lucky because I ended up working a little bit with her and sharing what I was doing. And she gave me some guidance and direction on where I should look and what I should be doing. But it was one of those moments when you go, this can't be happening. This cannot be real.
It did not happen by accident.
No, I mean, like, to
Absolutely
me,
not.
that is the power of attraction. You called that in.
I got the good, I mean, I just literally
Me
got
too. Me too. The other thing that you've said, some people may look at what you've created and think you've discovered something. You say is you've uncovered it, right? Like, that's the way that you put it.
And again, I steal that language from aletheia, that word that means truth, that which will be revealed. The overlap between these two things is not that surprising when you think about it, because my studies had gone back to some of the original documents that had been so influenced by those cultural facts over the ages. What I do think is that as I worked on this, I didn't feel like I was creating anything new. I was really just uncovering what was already there. And I think my first study had sort of uncovered sort of the base framework. And then these old ancient texts really gave sort of some of the rich stories around that framework. These aeons come in pairs. So again, my original cards had been pairings of cards, and these aeons come in these pairs. But the relationship, they're called syzygies. They're pairs that are inextricably linked. It means yoked together, like two oxen, so held together. And when you actually look at them, they're not opposites. They're complementary pairings. In fact, they've been given genders, male and female, because they're about how these two things are perfect together and fit. For me, it's really fascinating that the more you get into the details, the more you get into how these things have been described for a millennium. That for me is where I just feel like I'm scraping off the dust and dirt and just revealing these things that are actually really powerful and have been around for a very long time. And in fact, Carl Jung, who, when he was creating his frameworks for his developing of psychology, he actually used a number of these texts. Now, this was before this big haul was found in the 1940s. So there were a few texts out before, and he used some of the frameworks for his definition of the subconscious and the soul. And he described it as a perennial root. So it's a root in the ground that every so often comes back and is flowered. And he said this goes back to the Kabbalah in ancient times. It's alchemy. The same themes come up in alchemy in the Middle Ages. They come back in the Reformation. And then I believe they're coming back now with Elaine and revealing the Gnostic Gospels, this massive hoard of these ancient texts that reveal amazing ways of thinking that have been lost for ages and are now just being uncovered. And they're inspiring lots of people. I feel like we're in the middle of a little bit of a renaissance on all of these ways of thinking.
And let's talk about the design of the cards, because first of all, they're beautiful. They're just absolutely beautiful. And I know people will get to see them because we're going to actually do a reading as well. But can you talk about why it was important for you to design them in a specific way that is very different than when people look at tarot cards and oracle cards and so forth?
So this is the first set of cards. And the design here, I was very intentional that a lot of the archetype cards tended to personalize and anthropomorphize or turn into people the different archetypes. And the problem with that is when you start to put sort of other aspects of the person, other imagery around them, you really sort of narrow people's understanding of what's on the card. So I was very intentional. What I wanted to do was keep these very symbolic and really simple so that the symbols that are represented here could actually mean something and that people could interpret them in their own way. So the first deck of cards were really, really simple. Each one of the 6 types is a shape, 6 fundamental sort of geometric shapes. And then the colors of the rainbow, again, the 6 key colors. The cards are actually color-coded and shape-oriented, and they're combinations of pairs of each of these different forces and energies. I was working with the designer, who's a guy called Graham Wood, and we just happened to take off the layer of all the superficial stuff, and it just went back to the simple design. And we suddenly just realized that that was the best thing. When I went to the AEON cards, which were the ones that were based on ancient text, I wanted to keep the elements of the ancient text still pretty clear. So the symbols are exactly the same symbols as were in the original cards, but they're just aligned with the different aeons from these texts. In these texts, there are lots of different characteristics. So half of these aeons are divine and half of them are earthly. And then obviously some of them are combinations of the two. So there's little symbols on each of the cards that tell you where in the hierarchy each of the cards fit. There's some other pieces on the cards as well, which are other layers of meaning. There's male, female. And again, that's not the gender male, female. That's about action and reaction. So what you see, I don't know if you can see here, but these are the cards, and they have these different symbols on them that really show where they fit. So you can go into these cards at the highest level and just take the word and what it means, and the book has the definition, and the cards that come with the deck have the definition. Or you can get really deep into the meanings about the different layers and the gender and all the different aspects.
I know every card spurs so many different questions. And are you still using the first deck?
I still use the first deck all the time with marketing clients and anybody in the marketing sort of advertising creative world. That deck still works best when I'm dealing with corporations or businesses or stuff like that. But now more and more people are interested in the personal cards. All sorts of different people find these cards in different ways, but I've got people who are like life coaches who have been using them. I've got all sorts of people using them just in the same ways you would use tarot. And I've got some people who just love the sort of deeper technical aspects. I didn't realize that Gnosticism is one of the fastest growing religions in America at the moment. It's an early form of Christianity. And actually, so these texts that were found in the 1st and 2nd century was before the real canonization of the Christian faith. So these were Christian texts that sort of before the formal Catholic Church was canonized. They all got named Gnostic, which means knowing. People are going back to early Christianity and finding some of these ideas that are frankly in some of these texts that were discovered in 1940s. And they're finding spirituality and they've created churches around them.
When you work with people, are you surprised by the cards that they pick and how relevant that they are to their life story and maybe some answers that they need to hear? I'm wondering, how magical do you think these really are?
It's a really good question. I started off thinking that really it was just random. Originally, the magic was a sort of tapping into intuitive knowledge or subconscious knowledge that they couldn't previously reveal to themselves. And in some ways, that was magic enough for me. Which was that you're unlocking a door and you're opening a door to something that they already knew, but they couldn't quite access. This second deck of cards has really push my thinking, because I've been doing these readings now for 5 years, and I am always amazed what comes out and how, not just by my definition, but by the person having the reading, just go, that was exactly what I needed to know. And I come back to the things that I don't quite know. Is that just random, or is there some sort of serendipity there? Is the serendipity more than just a casual coincidence? And it happens so much that I find it really hard to believe that it's just random acts of insight. There's got to be something else there. Now, don't ask me to explain it. It's one of those things I have no explanation for. I always describe it as a power. They seem to have a power, and they seem to come at the right time for the right people.
Can I give you an example? So you sent me your beautiful book. When I first looked at it, William, I felt like I was seeing something from the ancient past, but also from the very distant future. You so sweetly put a card into the book, which I'm sure you do for all. And I think that's awesome. And I don't know anything about these cards. So obviously I just looked at, and this is the one that I got.
Marocarotids, yes.
Yes. I opened this book two or 3 days ago. I can't remember what. And at the time, we were marooned here in Dallas in a blizzard. I was marooned with 5 people and 3 dogs in this teeny apartment trying to do my work. There was a fire alarm going off all day long, 2 apartments down, because there was water main breaking everywhere. It was mayhem. So this is the card I picked, right? And of course, I look it up, and the first definition is perfect beauty and perfect bliss, nirvana, perfect happiness, a destination to seek, a thing to be sought or aimed for. In some ways, heaven, freedom from evil and sin, and escape. And I was like, oh man, this is like completely not right for me. But then I realized I had gotten the reverse one. And when I pulled that, I was like, oh, and then I read the reverse, and it's imprisonment, confinement, or punishment, the darkness of a cage with no light.
Which could not have explained your situation.
Made me laugh so hard.
It still surprises me.
Well, and you think about the timing, you had sent that to Karen weeks ago. She didn't open it until a few days ago when she was in the middle of this. It was complete mayhem.
That moment was that card, literally.
I used to do an exercise, and I still do every so often. I used to do it every single day, where I would look at a card and really just reflect on one card. In these Gnostic texts, they talk about different levels of meaning. Hylic, which is very much material. So look at this from a material. Psychic, which is look at it from a mental and psychology perspective. And pneumatic, which is spirit. So it's sort of material, psychological, and spiritual. And so just one card is often a really, you can reflect in 3 ways on that one card. I used to do it every day. I tell you, it often framed my whole day. And I was like, I can't believe that card came up this morning. And I think back to what we were talking about in terms of creativity and finding your own creativity. I've described these cards as really guidance from your own being, where if tarot tends to be described as getting guidance from above, where there is some forces in the world that are just telling you what's going to happen, but you have no control and you have no say in that. The way I've been doing these readings and the way I use them is very much, and I call it guidance from your own being, that the cards reveal choices and decisions they're suggesting to you. Each one of the cards in a different position sort of gives you a way in to think about whatever it is you're facing. And it reframes it so you see it from a different perspective. And almost always a different perspective is helpful, but sometimes it just gives you a thing and go, oh my God, that's how I should be thinking about it. And so for me, it's that unlocking of options that perhaps you haven't seen or you can't see because you're approaching this problem the same way you always solve every problem. And the reason it's not fixing is because you keep trying to fix it the same way. And what's lovely about the AEONs were believed to be something that was in everything. It was in every object, in nature, in the world, but it was also, it's a map or a compass of what was called the divine spark. And the divine spark was this divine aspect of all human beings. But it's not just a single faceted thing. It's actually a multifaceted thing with all these 36 different aspects to them. And so what that's essentially saying is that we all have all of these different aspects within us. And it's not like you're creative or you're not, like Myers-Briggs or Enneagram, that sort of say you're this, you're not that. What I love about it is it's actually saying you're all of these things. Just explore these aspects of you and find out more about that aspect of you. And that for me, I mean, it's interesting. Gnosis and Gnosticism, it means knowing, but it's not about knowing a sort of religious truth. It's actually knowing a truth within you. But that truth in these texts is a divine truth. So by knowing you, you know God, you know the supreme being, but you also know something about everyone else and nature, that it's a connective tissue between us, between nature, between God. These are thousands of years old, and they've been fine-tuned over the thing. Like Carl Jung used them for his psychology. Like alchemists and Kabbalah all come from the same origins.
I'm so grateful that you've uncovered this, rediscovered it, however we want to put it.
Some may say channeled.
It's something that I've never told anyone. Well, actually, my husband knows, but the AEON cards, my husband had to go away for a week. I was home on my own. I'd been digging into the text. I'd met Elaine. I wrote probably in 3 days, but then finished it off over the 5 days. Almost every single aspect of the cards, the design, where they came from, what they did. If there's ever a thing that was channeling, I was channeling something those days, because literally I had the idea and then it came out in 3 days, the full system. And it's a complex system, actually.
Yes, it is. The fact that you've uncovered 36 aspects, right, that we all have. And sometimes we're more of one thing than another, depending on where we are in our life, depending on the day. And there's a reason why that might be brought up for us to really look into that aspect, because we're not looking at all of them all the time, but we have them all within us.
It is the potential within each of us that is there. And I come back to that definition of magic. Is like, if I believe it's there, then I can use it to achieve something that people who don't believe this will think is impossible. And I think that same definition of magic works here. Is like, if I can believe that these things are in me and I can use them to achieve the end, then sometimes I achieve that end, even though everyone said it was impossible.
Are you teaching how to use them? I know I can figure this out by looking through the book.
At the back, there is a number of different ways that I've found that are really helpful to read. So there's a 1-card reading, which I described a little bit earlier. There's a 3-card spread, which is a slightly different. The one I use the most often, which is a 4-card. And then there's a really complex 6-card spread, which I actually use for sort of when I really want to know about a particular thing and there's an object of exploration. I have not had time to do teaching. I do readings for people, and in those readings I will teach someone how to use it for themselves. And I'm also very interested, different people have started using them in different ways. And I'm also very interested in the community telling me how they're using it. We want to do a quick sort of demonstration reading. I won't do a full reading, but
Yeah.
We'd love that.
In the deck, there's this card, which is more of a key card.
Yeah.
That key card represents, on each of the cards, there is a shadow of light and dark. And again, that's the spirit of things that come together that cannot be separated. With light comes darkness. So every card has an angle on it with a light and dark. Every angle is on this key card. So you can actually read the angle of the light and dark on each card as well. And on the back of this is the key to the different generations, the different layers of meaning based on where in these ancient tech the cards came out. Karen, should I do you? What I'm going to do is, because normally I would get someone to shuffle the cards, I'm going to keep shuffling. Just tell me when to stop.
Feeling good about now.
Okay, what I'm going to do is 3 piles there, 1, 2, 3. Or do you want me to put them back in?
The middle one first, then the one to the right, and then the one to the left.
Okay, so I'm going to do the simplest 4-card reading, and I may have to pick up the book occasionally because even I have to sometimes look up what the real meaning is. The 4-card reading starts with the cards telling you what the subject is. And as I said, this is not guidance from above. I'll describe what is on the card, and you.
Okay.
So unlike tarot, you'll tell me a little bit more of what it means to you.
Okay. Robyn will help me because she always does.
True. I can't help myself.
So this is Felitas, which is,
Okay.
well, Felitas means perfection, but it's not as in perfect, it's as in constantly perfecting and honing and improving. So the symbols on here, the triangle is inner. So there's an inner self, something you're perfecting or developing. And this is something that has many facets. That's what the symbol in the middle means, the pentagram. It's many faceted. It might be complex. It might be something that you've been doing for a long time. So is there something going on that is about yourself? It's something, but it's this development, improving, again, something complex.
Oh, this is good.
Design or willing things into existence, constant improvement.
Yes, sir. That would be about right.
So you're willing, what is it you're willing? What's the subject here?
It's this co-creation that Robyn and I are talking about that is at the forefront of every moment of every day. Would you say? Yes.
Yes, I would.
So we have this vision for what we want to create in terms of our overall production of a show, of a platform that will deliver content like this, like classes, like shows, like commerce. We want to develop this larger platform that can allow people to experience this content and so much others. And also to give people like you a place that seekers can find you, right? Because we're finding people are all over people are going down rabbit holes on the internet looking for this type of information and they can't find it. So our vision is that. So that falls in perfectly.
So that's the subject. So this is, we're talking about.
That's the subject that we're talking about. Okay.
And there's an interesting parallel there between this idea of Felitas and perfection, because actually the idea of perfection is built on the fact that this will never stop. So on my other deck of cards, this was the designer. This is the designer card, or you're designing something and just constantly fine-tuning, making better. So,
well, and we look at this as always evolving, right? Seeking. We will never stop seeking or evolving.
Right. And once we create this thing, it will never stop evolving as well. But what I find so interesting that this card is the one that came up because it's both of us, right? Like in this forum, it's like, that's true. So interesting that would be the one. Right?
Full reading, we would explore that a little bit more, but yes.
Okay.
Then the second card is the inner, what you will look to yourself for. So this is agaratos, which is eternal. Talk a little bit about the symbols on here. So what you've got here is the truth, which is discovery, the forward-facing triangle. Seeking truth, something will be revealed. It's got the shield in the middle, which is protection, care. So this is a card, it actually means protecting that what matters. So the card here says, stay on course, stay unwavering. What this suggests to me is that this is an ongoing struggle. This is something that you're going to be doing for a long time. Eternal means being true to that nature, being true to the core idea of what you're having to develop. So you're going to have to find within yourself the thing that holds this together. It's almost like that lens through which you just, everything you do, you put it through that lens, put it through that thing to make sure that you're staying on course.
Robyn and I talk almost every day. And so it's really that, where's that North Star? What is my inner truth? What is my purpose? How do I stay steadfast to that? And that's totally connected to that first card.
Karen and I have been in situations where people are interested in what we're doing, but want to put their own spin on it for commercial reasons. And we are unwavering in staying true to what we believe, which is that we can educate, entertain, and inspire without exploiting people, without exploiting healers and teachers. We know what the magic can be and is. Our goal is to show people the magic and awaken, I would say, reconnect them to why they're here.
That is the purpose of why I'm here. That first card is what I want to do. And to get there is following my inner truth, my soul's purpose.
In the book for this one was so this is about consistency and something that will always be present. So what you're doing now has to live to everything you're doing in the future. Stick with what you know, stay on course, be unwavering, a consistent and universal truth. Something true in the past, something true in the future, something that will withstand the test of time, and in that sense will always be ageless, youthful, and energized. Knowing what matters, that protecting what matters, and not getting pulled off course. And that for me is what it's saying, that you have to look to yourself for. Don't lose sight of that core.
So helpful.
The next card is how you should act outwardly, like how you should go forth. But it is parakletos, but it is reversed. And I often have to look at parakletos means the helper. So if this was the right way round, this would be the helper, which means use your power for the good of multiple people. Empathy, compassion, giving and receiving. But this is upside down. So this is the reverse of that. What this is saying is you've got to go forth recognizing that there are going to be obstructions and difficulties. And I think this makes more sense in the sense of the eternal. So this is saying you may be faced with all sorts of hurdles and difficulties and things. And if this is what you've got to look to yourself for, then this is saying that you've got, your power has to be to overcome those difficulties. The reason the square is there is because those difficulties may require other people to help you overcome it. You may not be the one, because the square is social. It's about community and collection. So you may not be the one who has to solve all of the problem. There may be social dynamics or other people who might be able to help you overcome them. So actually doing this with others is going to be an important part of how you will resolve and overcome these challenges. So don't go this alone.
That's true. On a lot of levels, I think there's always that sense of me feeling like I have to help everybody else. When it came in reverse, I was kind of happy. To me, I was reading it like, you don't have to help everybody else.
It is interesting that it's inverted, because I think really one of the themes in Karen's life is that she's been the person to help everyone else. And so it makes sense to me that this is showing her she needs to let other people help too, in order to make this come true.
So the last card is what will be the outcome that you might be able to believe that possibly others may not, to come back to our definition of magic. So the final card here, this is my favorite card. This is Sophia.
I got Sophia too. Do you remember? I don't know if you remember. And I wear Sophia, like I wear the energy of Sophia every day. We talked about this. That's crazy town.
What's also interesting is in the story of the Aeon, and this whole cosmology, the final, the most practical, the most grounded pair that were born were Felitas, which is your first card, and Sophia. They are a pair. This is a syzygy. These two things go together. And in the story of the origin of the universe, Sophia wanted to create something, but she wanted to create it without Felitas. And so she created man without Felitas, which means imperfect. And so created this imperfect world. And that was the origin of the material world that we live in. It was an undivine world, and it was filled with imperfect things and other stuff. So Sophia is one of my favorite characters because she then tried to write everything. Anyway, I could go into Sophia quite a lot. Sophia means wisdom. This is saying that the outcome here will be abilities, skill, craft, and good judgment. If you keep on this path, there is a whole load of knowledge and wisdom and experience that you will be generating and developing. The pentagram here is the many sides. You will learn in lots of different ways, and ways that perhaps expand you. And then the downward facing triangle, that's the inner. So it's the inner wisdom. It's the wisdom of self. And again, given what we've talked about today, the outcome here is actually finding something that is really true to you. And I think because these two are together, the path you're on and where you're going to end is actually going to be a combination of these two. So this is going to be a journey for you as much as it is a journey for other people.
Wow. I almost don't know what to say. That is it just reflects exactly where, we are, which I think is just so appropriate in this setting right now. So thank you so much.
I'm looking for my notes and I can't find them.
I definitely know you had Sophia.
I had Sophia.
The outcome was definitely Sophia, because we had a big conversation.
We did. And I talk to Sophia every day, like the energy of Sophia and asking for wisdom and being able to teach wisdom and receive wisdom. So it's amazing to me to see that tangibly in that card, to come up in Karen's reading. I know it came up in my reading as well. And to have that be where we're going.
And again, one of the follies of Sophia was that she tried to do something on her own, but actually it was only by getting back together with Felitas and reestablishing that connection. And in some ways, the pairs are interesting, because when this imperfect world was created, then all of the aeons were separated, and actually balance, wholeness, fullness. So the universe that the divine live in is called the pleroma, and it means fullness, wholeness. It's about connecting these things back together. And so bringing Felitas back with Sophia, there's no end to that. The constant perfection and the constant seeking of wisdom is something that is an eternal journey.
It's also reflective of like how we feel about each other, both trying to go down our own paths and realized how we have a vision that is just so locked together. So this couldn't have been a better sort of affirmation, I think, for both of us too.
Yes.
Like that
I'm
Sophia
now
card.
looking at that sign behind your head where it has Robyn and Karen underneath seeking.
Yes.
I'm thinking of that as a syzygy in its own self.
Oh, you're right. I love it. Love it. All right, let's do Robyn.
We'll do me again with Karen.
Tell me when to stop shuffling.
You can stop.
Okay.
Oh boy.
1, 2, 3. Just tell me which one first, which one second, which one third.
Okay, you're gonna do the one on the right first, then the middle, and then yeah.
You've got Macarotis. We've already spoken about Utopia.
That's my card. That's
It
That's-
is. You go
Is it which
Wait a
way is
minute.
it? Which way is it?
the right way up.
Wow. Wow.
I mean, there's a lot of cards in that deck. Come on, people.
No, there are a lot.
And so the right way up means what is that?
Bliss,
So it's
tranquility.
Utopia.
I'm in that place, right?
This is bliss, this perfect place, this thing. This is defining the subject. So there's something going on with you, forward facing. So it's part of that discovery, that truth, but it has the square, which is again, that's the social thing. So this is not bliss as in selfish bliss. This is with somebody else. This is with others, finding community, finding happiness. Does that say anything to you specific?
What that embodies is what I have created for myself over the last, I'd say, 1.5 to 2 years, which is this partnership and a fulfillment in what I'm doing on a daily basis that I was missing for quite some time.
Yeah, so this is what I wrote in here. A thing to be sought or aimed for, in some ways a heaven and escape, a freedom from evil and sin. There's something here that you're stepping out of. Again, if you remember, Karen's the opposite was you're trapped in. So there's something here you're stepping out of, and that's the subject, is like aiming for something.
It's choosing to believe actually in myself, in what I'm creating, in something bigger, and stepping out of fear. It's stepping out of fear of what people may think, of not succeeding, a failure, and stepping into just what will be and believing that I'm here to teach something bigger.
And this is the great thing when we have these conversations and it points you to a specific aspect. So we could have looked at lots of different aspects of you and your thing that you're doing with Karen, but this is about that specific aspect. So the interesting thing is here, we're not just talking about the whole thing, we're talking about your seeking of that place.
Yes.
This is the card reading is going to be about that.
I think that frames it perfectly, because what I'm seeing is, first of all, you're absolutely, what you said, Robyn, is right. It's about stepping into the light and get to that place of tranquility, that place of bliss.
And Karen, we talked earlier about the light and dark on the card. And just as you said, stepping into the light, it made me go, oh, let's look. You see the angle there? The light and dark is at that angle.
Yes.
That angle is that line there, which is liberation and revelation.
Oh, wow.
So fun.
I mean,
wow.
Again, you see from getting away from the thing that's painful, but also seeking that utopia and bliss is that relationship of liberation, but also revelation.
Those two words.
Oh, I was gonna, those two words.
Better. We were just talking yesterday, right, about this feeling of confinement and how like Robyn is just like, can't take it anymore, right? And like, when are we going to get to our destination of this big project we want to launch to the world? So it's like wanting to be liberated from where she is, right? And when is it going to reveal itself to us? I mean,
thinking about that aspect of your journey, what should you explore inwardly? This is agape. Interesting. Agape is love. This is saying like, so love is this combination, the power of love that is in. So agape is not eros, is sexual love. In fact, the Greeks had probably about 5 or 6 different words for love. This is a more universal love. Agape was the love of loves. It is the love that is the love of family, the love of other, loving your fellow man, loving even God. It's the universal love that connects all of us. And it's the highest form of love. And so what this is saying is that you've got to look to yourself for finding that love of other, finding that love of people.
Yes.
I opened the book up. It says the feeling of love, desire, and affection to hold something in esteem, admiration, and wonder, a spiritual and emotional connection with another or others, an inner desire or want.
One of the things that I've worked on over many years is that love of self and then believing in what I want. Again, then I have certain things that I do and say every day. And going back to the first card, what I say is choose love over fear. And I say love over fear, love over fear. So it's interesting to me that this is the card that I got is about love.
Yeah, there's a vulnerability in loving because you have to really put yourself into that. That sort of universal love is unquestioning. It's throwing yourself in, not second guessing and not hedging or not holding back. That is saying you've got to really, really throw it in.
Yes.
You just have to have that faith that it will reward. Sometimes it's hard. That's where the fear comes in. It's like, if you're telling yourself love and fear, this is saying go for love.
That you deserve it. And that you're deserving of it.
The next one is outward, how you act, how you should behave, what's your outward expression. Henosis. Sometimes I wonder with these cards. Henosis is union. This is the marriage. This is partnership, harmony, complementary other, the shield. So it's the protection and it's the moving forward with that thing that matters. Basically saying go out with a complementary other. The union is what keeps things going.
It makes so much sense. And Karen had it inverted.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. So I can read it. It says union, a coming together of bodies, union, unity as one, marriage, partnership, orgasm or climax, transcendence beyond intellect, at one with reality, spirituality, and the universe. Peace, harmony, and balance.
So again, so you have to translate that into how you go forth. So in this position, that card is about going forth in union, in partnership, understanding that it's the complementarity of the two of you. It's the strength that comes from union, not from being on your own. So again, your two readings are actually can be read across each other.
Very much.
Final one is what will be the ultimate outcome. So this is Patrikos, which is actually the father. Now, the father figure is an interesting figure. And again, this is something you're giving birth to. The father gives and then has to let it go. So unlike a mother who is, actually both of them have to let go eventually, but the mother is more of the nurturing. And the father, really his only role is the protecting, making sure that the environment is such that this thing can survive. So what this is saying is you are giving birth to something, but your role here is not as mother and nurturer, but actually a little bit the defender, the hero, really looking out for what matters, looking out. I'm coming back to the conversation we had earlier, which Karen, you were much more about know what matters and discovering that truth, whereas this is actually the other side, which is like you're the defender, you're a little bit the hero in this narrative. Superhero, you've got some superpowers. Karen, do you have the write-up?
I do. This is so perfect. It's really true. An authority figure, respected and demanding of respect. So talk about outcome, right? So stepping into the light, fearlessly doing it, taking it on. The creator or author of something, strength and a father's protection of his possessions and family, heroism, defending a worthy or valuable cause, the setter of boundaries, establish parameters within which you must work.
Wow.
It's like defending that. This is us. This is our authenticity.
Wow.
This is our
It's all of
thing.
it.
You're
It's
not
all-
going to tell me it's something else that it shouldn't be.
That's pretty incredible.
I like the setting of boundaries. I think that for me captures the heroism as well as, because it's not heroism in an egotistical way, but it's protecting. And again, you've got this shield thing, which is the protecting symbol, but you've also got this multifaceted, so it's protecting on many sides. This is one of the most practical.
Can I offer another interpretation as well? Only because I'm the only one who would know this besides Robyn. I think it's another affirmation. I think you already know what I'm going to say.
I do.
So Robyn's father is so paramount in her life. He's not with us any longer, but he is the protector of her from the other side. She has named her production company after him.
I'm like staring at him as we were talking. Yeah.
And I have to add, the reason why we're actually working together is because of her father, because serendipitously, I sent Robyn this presentation that I created about this big idea I had that has united us. And it had her father's birthday on the name of the file. So it was like that sign from above.
It's a big number for me. I knew that Karen was the union And the fact that I got that card for the reasons that you have uncovered for what that means, but on a much more spiritual and higher level, the fact that he's part of the outcome, that is pretty big.
Hearing that story of your father is like that.
That's the magic.
That's the magic. It's what your father would want. This is
yes, it is.
And your father is part of this outcome. He's part of this journey,
yes.
And he's also part of where this will resolve. So
that makes me want to cry. I mean, he's a partner in this. Over the last 10 years, he's been integral in opening my eyes to something that I can't see. And you have been able to put so many of those things that I think we can't see into something more tangible. So that is just incredible that's how it ended.
I'm hanging on your every word because there's just so, I say all the time, there's so much to learn. There's so many layers of meaning that we as human beings, we can't even see. And this is just another way of really looking at our lives. Think about how special of a message this is, like how it fills us up with such life and hope.
Thank you for all the work that you've done. And that I know you will continue to do, but the work that you've done to create these cards and this thinking and really uncovering from all of these texts. Thank you for all of that work. Where should we direct people?
Knockwoodcards.com. You can buy the cards there.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Very much for telling my story.
Thank you for telling it.
I really appreciate you.
More to come. Thank you.
So much fun. So much fun. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.